Tonight we slip back thousands of years, into dusty marketplaces where sandals scuff against uneven stone and the air smells of roasted grain mixed with animal dung. The stars are just starting to blink awake above clay brick rooftops, and you find yourself in a place that feels both endlessly alive and strangely primitive. Here's the funny part, you probably won't survive this. Not because of some gladiator duel, but because the water around here is casually laced with bacteria your 21st century stomach never met before. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking into Mesopotamia, where bustling open-air bazaars form the center of daily life. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers carve fertile valleys, and on their banks, markets grow like ivy, spreading out, then pulling back, depending on floods, wars, or kings with fragile egos. People barter more than they pay. A farmer with figs shouts himself hoarse to compete with the potter showing off shiny clay bowls. Donkeys bray, kids chase each other between stalls, and everywhere there's this sense of constant, messy improvisation. What's striking is how little anyone cares about permanence. Historians still argue whether the first merchants here imagined anything like a covered, unified shopping hall. Some claim temples doubled as protomalls, since you could buy votive offerings, food, and maybe even a goat while you were there. Others say, no way, those were sacred spaces, not shopping centers. The point is, nobody in 2500 BCE thought, hey, let's build a massive, climate-controlled structure where people can browse in comfort. Comfort was not exactly trending back then. Here's a mainstream historical fact to ground you. By around 3000 BCE, the Mesopotamians had already invented writing, cuneiform tablets pressed with reed styluses, partly to keep track of trade. Clay receipts pile up like proto-spreadsheets, recording barley bushels and wool shipments. So the infrastructure for commerce was deeply advanced. But the architecture? Still open, chaotic, temporary. You wander through the stalls and you notice roofs are just reed mats or bits of cloth stretched against the brutal sun. If it rains, the market turns into a mud bath faster than your sneakers can squeak. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some Mesopotamian traders carried amulets carved with scorpions or lions, believing they would ward off cheating. Imagine slipping that into your wallet today. Don't mess with me, I've got a scorpion charm. The idea of consumer protection was literally magical thinking. So why didn't the first shopping mall emerge here? They had trade networks stretching all the way to the Indus Valley. They had sophisticated city planning with walls, canals, and even drainage. But the market itself stubbornly remained outside. Part of the reason might be psychological. Markets weren't about lingering, sipping coffee, or window shopping. They were raw survival zones. You bargained fast, got your onions, and left before heatstroke or a pickpocket got you. As you wander through one of these bazaars in Ur or Babylon, you notice stalls crowding close to the temple complex, almost like satellites orbiting a planet. The gods got the prime real estate, and the humans clustered around, hawking wares to the constant tide of worshippers. The arrangement is practical but also revealing. The spiritual center of the city was permanent, stone on stone, while the commercial life was still treated as transient. And here's where you can't help smirking a little. Imagine pitching the first mall idea to Hammurabi. Okay, sire, hear me out. We put all the shops in one giant building, climate-controlled, lots of skylights, maybe a fountain or two. You'd probably get smacked with a clay tablet and told to dig another irrigation ditch instead. Still, the seeds of the mall existed. When night falls, you linger by a firelit corner, and hear a merchant muttering about competition, how the cloth seller next door stole his customers. That tension, that clustering, is exactly what will one day drive the logic of the mall. Put everyone in one place, and let the customers flow. But for now, the bazaar is a river delta, shifting, muddy, prone to drying up or flooding out, but always returning, always buzzing. You shuffle deeper, sandals sticking in the dust. Somewhere a lyre plucks a lazy tune, half drowned by the clamor. A merchant calls to you, thrusting dried fish under your nose. Another waves a jar of sesame oil, promising eternal youth or at least shinier hair. You try to imagine these people tolerating escalators or glass atriums. No chance. Their world is still too elemental, too immediate. And maybe that's the lesson. Before malls could exist, humans had to start caring about comfort, about strolling for pleasure instead of sprinting for bread. But for now, you step back into the crowd. The bazaar swallows you whole, a maze of voices and smells, its chaos timeless. And the idea of the shopping mall? Still a distant dream, waiting patiently in the dark. You leave behind the clay brick chaos of Mesopotamia, drifting across centuries until the air suddenly brightens, salty breezes wash over you, and sandals crunch on white marble. Now you're in a Greek city-state, staring at the wide, sunlit expanse of the agora. At first glance, it feels a little like a farmer's market you'd stumble across on a Saturday morning, except instead of people selling heirloom tomatoes, you've got philosophers loudly interrogating strangers about the meaning of justice. And instead of food trucks, there's a guy roasting chickpeas over a brazier while teenagers toss dice in the shade of a colonnade. The agora is technically a market, but it's more than that, it's the heartbeat of Greek public life. Merchants set up stalls for olive oil, honey, wine amphorae, and pottery. You can smell figs drying in the sun, and hear the clink of bronze coins exchanged hand to hand. At the same time, politicians climb onto stone platforms to rant about taxes, generals boast about upcoming campaigns, and poets recite verses to anyone who'll listen. If you're trying to shop in peace, good luck. You're just as likely to get roped into a debate about whether virtue can be taught. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The agora of Athens stretched across several acres, and by the 5th century BCE it had permanent stoas, long covered porticos lined with columns, offering some shelter for merchants and philosophers alike. These stoas even had rooms at the back where shops could nestle. Sounds promising, right? Almost mallish. But despite the architecture, the concept never consolidated into a fully roofed, self-contained complex. The idea of covering the entire space in one protective shell simply didn't exist yet. And here's a quirky tidbit to amuse you. Some Greek vendors sold perfumes by letting customers sniff while soaked in oils. No neat little sample bottles, just tufts of sheep fluff jammed up your nose. Imagine walking past the Bath and Body Works counter today and being handed a fistful of greasy wool. Historians still argue whether the agora should be considered a protomall. On one hand, you had clustering of shops, semi-permanent architecture, and even decorative touches like fountains and statues. On the other hand, the space was deliberately open, democratic, chaotic, built as much for civic gossip as for buying sandals. A shopping trip here meant wading through political speeches, street performers, and the occasional public trial. Retail therapy came with jury duty on the side. The lack of a true mall might have to do with Greek cultural ideals. They prized the outdoors, the gymnasium, the open-air theater. Even temples were often designed to harmonize with the landscape, not block it out. To put a roof over the agora would have felt like caging the city's spirit. You walk through the colonnades, sunlight dappling off polished stone, and you realize, this is a society that wants shopping tied to civic virtue, not private escapism. Still, the seeds of retail spectacle are here. Statues of gods and heroes loom over the stalls, silently branding the merchandise with divine approval. Wealthy citizens sponsor fountains or porticos, showing off their money while giving the crowd shade. If you squint, it's not far from a billionaire plastering their name on a shopping center wing. You wander past a spice merchant who calls out, "Taste the East." His cinnamon sticks and peppercorns arrived from lands so far away they may as well be magic. He doesn't know it, but is part of a global trade web that one day will demand more permanent, centralized hubs. For now, though, he just wants you to stop staring and actually buy something. And here's a light joke for you. Socrates probably would have hated malls. Imagine him stalking around a food court, cornering teenagers and asking if they can define the good milkshake. Half would run, half would roll their eyes, and all would post it on TikTok within minutes. Yet even as you chuckle, you can sense the irony. The Greeks, masters of architecture and urban design, never invented the shopping mall. They built theaters with perfect acoustics, temples with jaw-dropping symmetry, but they let commerce stay out in the sun. Maybe it was too ordinary a thing to monumentalize. Or maybe the noise of the agora, the blend of buying and bickering, was exactly how they liked it. You find yourself standing in the middle of the square, cicadas buzzing in the heat, marble glowing underfoot. Around you, people haggle, argue, flirt, and philosophize, as if all human experience must pass through this open plaza. You shade your eyes, glance at the colonnades, and wonder how long it will take for someone, somewhere, to think, what if we put a roof on all this? For now, the answer remains, not yet. You leave behind the sunlit chatter of the Greek agora and step into the vast, echoing marble of Rome. Here, things feel different immediately, louder, denser, and far more monumental. The air carries the smell of roasted chestnuts, sewage, and incense all at once, and your sandals click against carefully paved stone roads. Welcome to the Roman Forum, the empire's grand civic stage, where emperors parade their victories, priests chant in Latin, and yes, merchants still try to sell you fish that's definitely past its prime. At first glance, you think, okay, this is it, right? The Romans built aqueducts, amphitheaters, and highways. Surely, if anyone invented the shopping mall, it had to be them. But no. As you stroll past triumphal arches and basilicas, you notice the shops are still scattered, little rectangular holes in the walls called tabani. They line the streets like convenience stores, their owners shouting for attention while balancing amphorae of wine or bolts of cloth on wooden counters. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Emperor Trajan commissioned a massive complex around 110 CE called Trajan's Market. With multi-story halls, vaulted ceilings, and over 150 shops tucked into terraces, it's often called the world's first shopping mall. But here's the catch, it wasn't quite what you're picturing. Instead of a climate-controlled indoor paradise, it was more like a government-owned strip mall embedded into the hillside. Impressive, yes, but not a single unified retail wonderland. And here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists believe some tabani doubled as ancient fast food joints. They've uncovered marble counters with deep round holes where soup or stew would simmer in clay pots. So, picture yourself walking through Trajan's Market, pausing at the Roman equivalent of a food court, and ordering lentil stew with a side of bread minus the soda refill. Historians still argue whether Trajan's Market counts as a precursor to malls or just a fancy administrative complex with shops on the side. Some say the architecture, arched ceilings, tiered levels, and indoor corridors suggests intentional planning toward collective retail. Others counter that Romans weren't thinking about shopping experiences at all, they just wanted efficient tax collection. For every loaf of bread sold, a coin dropped into imperial coffers. As you stroll deeper into the Forum, you can't help but marvel at Roman ambition. These people built aqueducts to carry water for miles, amphitheaters that could seat 50,000 screaming fans, and roads stretching across continents. And yet, when it came to shopping, they stayed practical and piecemeal. A butcher's stall next to a sandal maker's shop next to a money changer, it's lively, but it's not integrated. You almost want to hand them a PowerPoint presentation. Step 1, enclose the space. Step 2, add skylights. Step 3, invent escalators. Of course, Rome had other priorities. The Forum wasn't meant to be a leisure zone like your neighborhood mall. It was a theater of power. Statues of emperors loom overhead, reminding you that every purchase happens under their watchful stone gaze. If you wanted entertainment, you'd head to the Colosseum. If you wanted to feel civic pride, you'd stroll through the Forum. Shopping was just incidental. But don't get the wrong impression. Commerce thrived. You pass a leatherworker hammering sandals, his apprentice carefully threading straps through soles. A woman in a bright stola gestures dramatically as she haggles over a bracelet, while children dart between stalls begging for candied nuts. The energy is electric, but also fragmented. It's all outside, exposed to weather, noisy, dusty, and thoroughly Roman. And because this is Rome, bureaucracy lurks in the background. You overhear an official reminding merchants about market regulations: prices can't be too high, scales must be fair, grain must be fresh. The government inserts itself into daily transactions, ensuring bread remains affordable for the masses. Imagine your local mall security guard doubling as a tax collector. That's the Roman vibe. Here's your gentle joke. Imagine a Roman emperor trying to do a ribbon-cutting ceremony at a mall grand opening. He wouldn't just cut a ribbon, he'd demand a full triumph, elephants parading through the atrium, and probably sacrifice a goat at the food court fountain. Customer service line? Forget it. The emperor is the customer service. By the time the sun sets, golden light slants across the marble colonnades. Fires flicker to life inside little tabernae, casting shadows on rough brick walls. The Forum empties slowly, its grandeur settling into silence. You pause, imagining what it would feel like if someone had dared to cover all this under a single soaring roof. Maybe Rome wasn't ready. Or maybe its leaders wanted the chaos in the open air, where it could be seen, taxed, and controlled. For now, the Roman shopping world remains brilliant but stubbornly incomplete: grand architecture, scattered shops, bustling crowds, but no true mall. You take one last look at the Forum's gleaming stones before turning away, knowing the dream of a unified retail wonderland is still centuries out of reach. You step out of Rome's marble canyons and drift east, into a city where minarets and domes puncture the skyline, where shimmering mosaics gleam like frozen starlight. The air here smells of incense and sea breeze, and your sandals echo under arched porticos that stretch on and on. You've arrived in Constantinople, the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, a place where East and West braided themselves into something glittering, complicated, and very much alive. Here, the shopping experience shifts again. Instead of the open plazas of Greece or the scattered tabernae of Rome, you find yourself wandering into roofed arcades and vaulted galleries. At first, you feel that little jolt: wait, could this finally be the mall? The stone arches are high, the ceilings curved, and rows of shops line the narrow interior walkways. Candles flicker in bronze sconces, casting warm pools of light on bolts of silk and stacks of glassware. For a moment, it feels like you're walking through a 6th century boutique strip. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Byzantines were master builders, inheriting Roman engineering and adding their own flair. Their covered marketplaces, sometimes called Makellen, sheltered buyers from rain and harsh sun. Some were even attached to churches, so you could pray for your soul and then immediately bargain for salted fish. Very efficient. And here's a quirky tidbit. Constantinople's merchants sometimes advertised their goods using parades. Imagine a group of butchers marching through the street waving sausages like victory banners, shouting about freshness. Marketing in the Byzantine Empire was basically cosplay mixed with product placement. Historians still argue whether these covered arcades should be considered the ancestors of malls. Some scholars insist yes, the architecture shows clear steps toward unified indoor commerce. Others shrug and say they were still too fragmented, too tied to specific trades, lacking the centralized leisure function of modern malls. One thing is certain, the Byzantines weren't afraid of roofs. Unlike the Greeks, who worshipped sunlight, the The Byzantines knew the value of shade and protection, especially when your city doubled as a global trade hub. You shuffle down a narrow corridor, past jewelers hammering gold filigree, past spice sellers with pyramids of cinnamon, pepper, and saffron that scent the entire hall. Every turn feels like a treasure hunt. But unlike your suburban mall, you don't find shoe stores next to toy shops. Instead, each arcade often specialized, meat here, textiles there, fish down by the docks. The city government liked order, even if the corridors still buzzed with chaos. Of course, nothing in Constantinople was ever just about shopping. Politics oozed into everything. Merchants whispered about the emperor's latest tax decree while slipping bribes to officials. Church bells tolled, reminding you that salvation loomed over every transaction. The grandeur of Hagia Sophia itself seemed to watch over you as you browsed, its massive dome visible just beyond the rooftops. Buying a loaf of bread here wasn't just practical, it was spiritual, political, and social all tangled together. Still, you can't help but notice the gaps. The arcades are beautiful but small. They don't connect into a single enormous complex where you could lose yourself for hours. You can picture a Byzantine housewife sighing as she drags her basket from one arcade to another, rain dripping off her cloak, muttering about how nice it would be if all the butchers and bakers were under the same roof. The idea glimmers but doesn't yet crystallize. Here's your light joke. Try to imagine a Byzantine emperor unveiling a mall with a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Instead of scissors, he'd use a ceremonial sword, slice the ribbon clean in half, then immediately declare that anyone entering must kiss an icon first. Food court? Sure, but only if the hummus is blessed. As you step outside one of the arcades, the street noise swells. Horses clop past, vendors shout in Greek and Latin, and the Bosporus shimmers in the distance, ferrying goods from Asia and Africa. Constantinople hums with trade, wealth, and ambition. And yet, for all their mosaics and domes, the Byzantines never knit these arcades into a single, enclosed wonderland. Maybe it was cultural, commerce was important, but worship and politics always overshadowed it. Maybe it was practical, the empire had bigger concerns, like keeping out Persians, Bulgars, and eventually Crusaders who'd rather loot the shops than browse them. Or maybe the idea of shopping as leisure hadn't yet been born. In Byzantium, shopping was survival and spectacle, but never escape. Still, as the sun sets and lanterns flicker across Mars-shaped ceilings, you sense the potential lingering in the air. These arcades shimmer like a halfway step, a foreshadowing of malls to come, as if the city is whispering, "We almost had it, but not yet." You drift further south and east now, slipping through a gate carved with calligraphy, into a world where the air is thick with the smell of cardamom, frankincense, and roasting lamb. The alleys twist like a labyrinth, narrow enough that your elbows brush against stone walls polished smooth by centuries of hands. Lanterns swing overhead, and every turn reveals another cluster of stalls, fabric in one, copper pots in another, rugs stacked so high they look like miniature fortresses. Welcome to the Islamic souk, a market system that thrived for over 1,000 years, from Damascus to Cairo, from Fez to Samarkand. It feels different here, more maze than plaza. Unlike the open-air chaos of the Greek agora or the regimented arcades of Byzantium, the souk surrounds you, enfolds you. The roof overhead is patchy, some sections covered with timber, some left open to the sky, others shaded by woven mats. Sunlight pours through slats, painting golden stripes on jars of saffron and indigo cloth. Here's a mainstream historical fact. By the 9th and 10th centuries, many major Islamic cities boasted sprawling, roofed bazaars called Caesarea or khans, often located near mosques. These complexes could include warehouses, shops, and even inns for traveling merchants. Some had locked gates that closed at night, a reminder that commerce was not only vibrant but tightly organized. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some souks had official smell testers whose job was to make sure perfume and spices weren't diluted or fake. Imagine a career path where your nose is literally your resume. Yes, I can tell the difference between cinnamon and ground-up tree bark in 2 seconds flat. Historians still argue whether these covered souks represent the true first malls. The debate hinges on definitions. They had roofs, clusters of shops, sometimes even courtyards with fountains, but they lacked the single unified design of modern malls. Instead, the souk grew organically, expanding like a living organism, alley by alley, according to trade needs and city planning quirks. You wander through one now, and the sensory overload is delicious. Carpets pile high, thick with patterns so intricate you could get lost just staring at them. Spice mounds rise in pyramids of red, yellow, and brown, their scents swirling together until your head spins. A jeweler squints under lamplight, his fingers stained with gold dust. Somewhere nearby, a muezzin's call to prayer threads through the air, blending with the bargaining voices. Shopping here isn't just commercial, it's cultural, spiritual, and social all at once. But still, something is missing. You notice how the souk, despite being partially roofed, is segmented. Each trade guild controls its lane, the leather district here, the cloth district there, the perfume lane tucked away like a secret garden. You can't stroll aimlessly past everything at once, you're funneled into specialties. A medieval customer didn't window shop. You went directly to the right alley, haggled fiercely, and left. Leisure browsing was about as common as Wi-Fi. And here's a joke to lighten the mood: if modern malls had taken inspiration directly from souks, you'd have entire parking garages dedicated only to shoe lane or electronics alley. Imagine needing to drive across the lot just to get from the phone charger store to the food court. Still, the souk is astonishingly advanced. Some even had vaulted ceilings with openings to let in light while pulling hot air upward, a natural air conditioning trick centuries before central vac. Others offered caravanserais, big courtyard inns where merchants from distant lands could rest, unload camels, and store goods. That's like building a holiday inn right inside your shopping center. As night falls, the gates of the souk creak closed, locking the labyrinth until morning. You notice the contrast: so much structure, so much order, and yet still no single, vast, self-contained world of retail. The souk dazzles, but it refuses to consolidate. It's alive, organic, fractal, beautiful in its chaos, but not the sleek ancestor of them all. You slip out with the last of the customers, the scent of musk clinging to your clothes, the sound of haggling echoing in your ears. Somewhere in the distance, caravans prepare to leave, bells jingling softly as camels groan. The shopping mall dream remains stubbornly incomplete, lingering like incense smoke in the night. Your steps carry you out of the sun-dappled souk and into the damp grass of medieval Europe. The air is colder here, tinged with wood smoke and manure, and the market you've stumbled into isn't a permanent structure at all. Instead, you see wagons lined up along a muddy field, canvas tents flapping in the wind, and merchants shouting over the bleating of sheep. This is the world of the medieval fair, where shopping wasn't a daily convenience but a fleeting event, more festival than marketplace. The ground squelches under your boots as you wander between stalls. A potter hawks clunky mugs, their glaze bubbling in uneven patches. A spice trader shows off peppercorns with the flair of a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. Somewhere nearby, jugglers toss knives to entertain a crowd while pickpockets weave through distracted spectators. The whole place smells of ale, roasting meat, and wet wool. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Great fairs like the Champagne fairs in 12th and 13th century France became major hubs for international trade, drawing merchants from Italy, Flanders, and beyond. They weren't just shopping events, they laid the groundwork for banking systems, with contracts, credit notes, and currency exchange flourishing amid the tents. Yet, despite their economic brilliance, they remained temporary, dismantled once the festival ended. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval fairs included mock trials of pigs accused of stealing bread. Yes, actual pigs were put on trial, sometimes dressed in little outfits, with crowds jeering or laughing as verdicts were read. Talk about dinner theatre with extremely high stakes for the pig. Historians still argue whether the transience of these fairs slowed down the evolution toward permanent shopping centres. Some suggest that the excitement of occasional fairs was part of the draw. You bought luxuries precisely because they were fleeting, exotic, rare. Others believe the lack of infrastructure, poor roads, feudal politics, and constant wars made permanent malls impossible. After all, who wants to build a giant retail complex when raiders or rival lords might burn it down within a season? As you trudge deeper into the fairgrounds, you notice how the whole setup feels like a prototype of the mall food court plus entertainment wing. Roasting spits turn boars slowly, sending greasy smoke into the air. Minstrels sing bawdy songs while crowds clap along. Children gape at trained bears muzzled with iron rings, their trainers coaxing clumsy tricks for coins. It's half Walmart, half circus. Yet there's no roof to shelter you when rain clouds burst open. Suddenly, the crowd scatters, clutching wares under dripping cloaks, while mud sucks at your boots. In that moment, you can't help thinking how practical a permanent roof would be. A dry, sheltered space for both buying and entertainment, something like a mall. But the medieval mind isn't there yet. Shopping is still an occasional adventure, not a daily escape. Here's your light joke. Imagine a medieval influencer doing a haul video. What's up, fairgoers? Today I scored this slightly rusted dagger, 3 turnips, and a vial of questionable saffron. Smash that parchment seal if you want more unboxings. By nightfall, torches flare across the field, their smoke mingling with laughter and music. Merchants pack their goods into wagons, anxious to move before thieves strike under the cover of darkness. Within a day or two, the fair will vanish entirely, leaving nothing but churned mud and a few broken wagon wheels. Unlike a mall, there's no permanence, no glowing beacon on the horizon to pull you back next weekend. You watch as the last jugglers toss torches high into the black sky, their sparks dying as quickly as the fair itself. Shopping here is a seasonal spectacle, a carnival that flickers to life and fades again, leaving only stories. The dream of the mall, with its permanence and predictability, still waits centuries in the shadows. You squelch out of the muddy medieval fairgrounds, shake the straw from your cloak, and suddenly the streets around you gleam. Glass sparkles overhead, chandeliers drip with candlelight, and your footsteps click on polished marble instead of sinking into mud. You've walked into Renaissance Europe, where commerce is starting to dress itself in elegance. The rough tents and wagons of fairs give way to something new. Passages, covered arcades that glitter like jewelry boxes hidden in the heart of growing cities. You step beneath one of these arcades in Florence, Venice, or Milan. A glass ceiling arches above, held up by stone or early ironwork, letting shafts of sunlight pour down but keeping out the rain. Shops line the corridor in neat rows, their wooden shutters thrown open to display velvet, lace, and leather shoes so fine you'd hesitate to wear them. The air smells of beeswax polish, roasted chestnuts, and expensive perfume dabbed discreetly on wrists. For the first time, you feel the faint, delicious echo of a mall. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Renaissance saw the rise of permanent, semi-roofed shopping streets like the Masseria in Venice. Running between St. Mark's Square and the Rialto Bridge, this bustling passage became a commercial artery, lined with stalls that gradually transformed into permanent shops. It wasn't enclosed on all sides, but it offered continuity, year-round shopping in the same location. And here's a quirky tidbit. Venetian shopkeepers sometimes hired singers to stand outside and serenade customers. Forget background mall music. Here, you get a live performance while deciding which silk ribbon suits your doublet. Historians still argue whether these Renaissance passages should be considered direct ancestors of modern malls. Some say yes, the emphasis on beauty, leisure, and architecture shows a cultural shift from mere survival shopping to experience shopping. Others insist they were still too small, too limited, and too tightly tied to elite tastes. After all, not everyone could afford lace imported from Flanders or spices from India. You stroll deeper down the arcade, trailing your fingers along polished wooden counters. A bookseller displays illuminated manuscripts, their gold leaf glinting under candlelight. A jeweler holds up a necklace heavy with pearls, whispering about Medici patronage. Customers aren't just buying goods, they're buying status, displaying their refinement in public. And here lies another step toward the mall, shopping as performance. To be seen here is to be fashionable, wealthy, powerful. Still, you can feel the limits. The arcades are narrow, often just a single corridor, and they serve one city, one elite class. There's no sense of universality yet, no families wandering aimlessly with gelato, no teenagers loitering for hours just to kill time. Shopping remains purposeful, prestigious, and distinctly adult. Here's your light joke: if Renaissance arcades had security guards, they'd probably be philosophers in tights, stopping you at the door with, "But do you truly need that velvet cape, or are you just filling the void of mortality?" Yet, for all their pretentious sparkle, these passages represent a genuine leap forward. They use architectural innovation, glass ceilings, patterned floors, deliberate lighting, not just for utility, but to make shopping an aesthetic delight. They hint that maybe, someday, shopping could be about comfort and atmosphere, not just necessity. As night settles, the chandeliers overhead glow with flickering flames, sending reflections dancing across gilded trim. Merchants shutter their shops but leave the passage lit, creating a safe, almost theatrical promenade. You pause beneath the glass roof, hearing your own footsteps echo. It's not a mall yet, but for the first time, you can truly feel the possibility shimmering, like candlelight reflected on glass. You step out of the glittering Renaissance passages and into a city lit not by candle alone, but by an entirely new energy, rational order, symmetry, and the hum of Enlightenment optimism. Wide boulevards stretch out before you, lined with cafes where powdered wigs lean over steaming cups of chocolate, their voices buzzing about philosophy and politics. The world feels polished, measured, and strangely theatrical, as if the streets themselves were designed for promenading. Shopping is no longer a side note, it's part of the performance of public life. You glide down one of these new promenades, noticing how storefronts gleam under uniform facades. No more crooked medieval stalls leaning like drunks in the mud. Instead, you see deliberate rows of buildings, symmetrical windows, and consistent signage. Behind the glass, yes, glass merchants display goods in carefully arranged scenes, porcelain tea sets, imported silks, pocket watches ticking steadily. For the first time, you can stop, gaze, and imagine ownership without stepping inside. Window shopping is born. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In the 18th century, covered galleries began popping up in European capitals. Paris had the Galerie de Bois in the Palais Royal around 1786, offering a roofed walkway lined with boutiques, lit by lanterns, and filled with elegant strollers. These galleries blended leisure with commerce, a clear step toward the mall experience. And here's a quirky tidbit. The Palais Royal was notorious not just for its shops, but for gambling dens, theaters, and brothels tucked into its corners. Imagine today's mall food court, but with poker tables and scandalous side hustles. No wonder people flocked there. Historians still argue whether the Enlightenment galleries were proto-malls or just fancy urban experiments. Some call them the missing link, pointing to their integration of architecture, shopping, and leisure. Others argue they were too elitist, too Parisian, too decadent to be the true ancestors of the suburban shopping center. After all, Your average villager in 1780 wasn't sipping espresso while buying silk stockings. As you wander beneath the arcades, you can't help but notice how the Enlightenment loved order. Streets are lit with uniform lanterns. Facades follow strict design rules. Even the crowds seem arranged, ladies in gowns gliding gracefully, gentlemen in frock coats pretending not to gawk at shop windows. Shopping has become a spectacle in itself, a way to display refinement and wealth. And here's your light joke. Imagine an Enlightenment-era Yelp review. The Galerie de Bois is delightful, ample candles, agreeable echoes, though I do wish the violinist outside the hat shop had tuned his strings. 3 stars. What sets this moment apart is the merging of ideas. Coffee houses fuel debates about liberty and science just steps away from perfume counters. Philosophers like Voltaire or Diderot might stroll past you, quill in one hand, silk scarf in the other. Shopping and intellect intertwine, turning the gallery into more than a marketplace. It's a salon with price tags. Still, the galleries remain fragments. They're elegant, yes, and more permanent than medieval fairs or Renaissance passages, but they're isolated pockets. A few blocks of brilliance, not sprawling complexes where you can lose hours of your life. You sense the mall stirring, like a melody forming, but it hasn't yet crescendoed. By the time evening falls, the lanterns overhead glow golden, casting long shadows across polished floors. The laughter of cafe patrons mingles with the rustle of silk skirts and the creak of carriage wheels outside. You pause beneath the vaulted ceiling, feeling the mix of commerce and conversation vibrate around you. It's dazzling, refined, and oh so modern for its time. Yet, for all its elegance, it still stops short of the giant, unified world we now call a mall. The Enlightenment gave shopping a stage, but the full play has yet to begin. You slip away from the candlelit galleries of the Enlightenment and into a new century, one that smells not of perfume and roasted coffee but of coal smoke and hot iron. The world is louder now, hammers clang, whistles shriek, and the steady hiss of steam engines fills the air. This is the industrial age, when humanity learned to bend steel and glass into shapes our ancestors couldn't dream of. And with these tools in hand, the dream of covering entire shopping worlds suddenly feels possible. You wander into a factory yard, sparks flying as molten iron is poured into molds. The air scorches your lungs, but what you're seeing is history's new building block: cheap, mass-produced iron beams. Add to that sheets of glass rolling out of furnaces by the ton, and suddenly architecture is no longer confined to squat stone and timber. For the first time, humanity can build vast open spaces, roofed in crystal, airy and light-filled. The ingredients for the mall are finally on the table. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The mid-19th century gave birth to monumental glass and iron structures like London's Crystal Palace in 1851. Built for the Great Exhibition, it was essentially the world's biggest trade show under one roof, nearly 1 million square feet of glass and steel, filled with exhibits from across the globe. Technically not a mall, but the scale and design proved humanity could build vast, enclosed shopping-style environments. And here's a quirky tidbit. The Crystal Palace had full-grown trees planted inside it. Imagine strolling through a futuristic glass box, browsing displays of sewing machines and telegraphs while birds nested above your head. More landscaping today? Fake ficus. Crystal Palace? Real oak trees. Historians still argue whether exhibitions like the Crystal Palace or Paris's Palais de l'Industrie should be considered protomalls or just temporary showcases. Some say they were critical test runs, indoor, climate-sheltered, filled with commerce and leisure. Others dismiss them as one-off spectacles, not true retail hubs. But the fact remains, without the Industrial Revolution's steel and glass, the mall as we know it would never have stood a chance. You leave the factory yard and walk into one of the new urban shopping streets of the 19th century. Gas lamps flicker overhead, and behind big glass windows you see mannequins draped in dresses that shimmer under lamplight. Mannequins themselves are an invention of the age, creepy wooden torsos that somehow convince passers-by to stop and stare. You suddenly realize window shopping is being industrialized, too. Display becomes theater. And here's your light joke. Imagine a Victorian TikTok trend where people just record themselves standing dramatically in front of a window display, clutching their top hats while the caption reads, #mannequin mood. The industrial age doesn't just give us new buildings, it changes shopping itself. Trains and steamships move goods across continents, filling stores with exotic products that once took months to arrive by caravan. Suddenly, choice explodes. A shopper in Manchester or Paris can pick from Indian cotton, Chinese porcelain, American tobacco, or South African diamonds, all in the same trip. Shopping becomes global. And yet, it's still fragmented. The grand iron and glass halls like the Crystal Palace show what's possible, but everyday shopping streets remain just that, streets. Individual shops line them, sometimes covered by partial arcades, but the fully unified indoor retail world hasn't yet materialized. Still, you can feel the tension building. Crowds throng into department stores like Bon Marche in Paris or Marshall Fields in Chicago, marveling at escalators, bright lights, and vast sales floors. Industrial society is demanding bigger, more centralized retail spaces. The tools exist, the desire exists, the consumer culture is awakening. All that's left is for someone to stitch these ingredients together into the first true mall. As night falls, gas lamps hiss to life, casting eerie halos across smoky streets. You pass a row of shop windows, their glass panes fogged slightly from the warmth inside, where clerks fold fabric and polish counters. You can almost sense the future pressing at the glass, waiting to burst through. The mall is closer than ever, just one more leap away. You step across the channel and into mid-19th century Paris, and the streets feel like they're humming with possibility. Iron and glass glint in the sunlight, carriages clatter along cobblestones, and the scent of fresh pastries mingles with coal smoke from nearby factories. Here, shopping is becoming something more than survival or spectacle, it's flirtation, theater, and status all wrapped into one. Paris is experimenting, and you can almost feel the air vibrating with the promise of indoor retail wonderlands. You wander into one of Paris's covered arcades, galleries like the Passage des Panoramas or the Galerie Vivienne. Above your head, a high glass ceiling curves gracefully, letting in filtered sunlight. Below, polished floors reflect the light, while the air carries the mingled scent of perfumeries, pastry shops, and leather goods. Shoppers in frock coats and hoop skirts drift past you, some stopping to peer at displays of watches, lace, and exotic fabrics. The atmosphere is civilized, orderly, and remarkably comfortable compared to the muddy fairs or bustling souks you've wandered through in the past. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Paris's covered passages were early experiments in what we might call experience shopping. Built primarily in the early 19th century, these arcades offered permanent shops, protection from weather, and a controlled, elegant environment that encouraged browsing rather than mere necessity. They were particularly appealing to the growing bourgeoisie, who valued leisure, style, and display. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some passages included indoor promenades where people could exercise or take carriage rides on wet days, sort of an early hybrid of mall and mini-gym. Imagine strolling in a hoop skirt while your horse trots beside you inside a shopping arcade. Historians still argue whether these Parisian arcades represent a true step toward the mall or simply a fashionable urban quirk. Some claim the combination of indoor space, clustered shops, and leisurely promenading is a clear ancestor of the modern mall. Others insist the passages were too small, too elite, and too tightly focused on luxury goods to count as anything like what we think of today. You wander past a pastry stall, the scent of chocolate and almonds clinging to the air, and notice how retail is now deliberately theatrical. Window displays are carefully staged. Shopkeepers arrange goods to catch the eye, almost like directors on a stage. People linger, not out of necessity, but because browsing itself has become pleasurable. It's a revolution in shopping psychology. The customer is a spectator, a participant, and a performer all at once. And here's a light joke. If someone tried to bring today's mall etiquette back to a Parisian arcade, they'd probably be horrified. No running. Keep your hands off the silk. Step away from the croissant. Meanwhile, a man in a top hat casually tries to haggle over a macaroon. The arcades also demonstrate the growing influence of culture and fashion. Jewelry shops flank bookstores, perfumeries neighbor cafes, and even small theaters are tucked into corners. Shopping becomes a social event, a way to see and be seen, a subtle dance of desire and display. In essence, Paris is schooling the world in how commerce and leisure can coexist under one roof. Yet, despite their elegance and innovation, these arcades remain linear, narrow, and city-bound. You can stroll, window shop, and socialize, but there's no expansive multi-level wonderland with food courts, escalators, or anchor stores. The mall exists in spirit, not scale. By evening, gas lamps flicker to life, casting a golden glow on polished floors and glass ceilings. Shoppers drift home, umbrellas in hand, while the scent of baked goods lingers in the cool air. Paris has nudged the dream closer, showing that indoor, pleasurable shopping is possible, but the giant, fully integrated mall is still waiting in the wings. You step out of Paris and cross the Channel, finding yourself in Victorian London, where the streets hum with industry, horse-drawn omnibuses, and the chatter of an emerging middle class. The fog hangs low, tinged with coal smoke and the scent of baked bread, and the city feels alive in a way that's chaotic yet organized. Here, shopping is beginning to transform again, taking a big leap from Parisian arcades to something larger, more ambitious, the department store. You wander into a place like Harrods or Selfridges, and immediately notice the scale. Multiple floors rise above you, each one filled with counters for textiles, hats, jewelry, and household goods. Bright gas lamps illuminate polished wood and gleaming brass, and clerks in neat uniforms glide through the aisles, assisting ladies in elaborate dresses and gentlemen in waistcoats. The space is larger than anything Parisian arcades ever attempted, yet still contained under one roof. For the first time, shopping feels like an experience you could lose hours inside, without stepping outside once. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Department stores in mid to late 19th century London pioneered multi-level shopping under one roof, with elevators, grand staircases, and strategically arranged displays. They also popularized window shopping, signage, and staged sales events, elements that would become essential in the design of 20th century malls. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some department stores employed gentlemen escorts whose job was to follow women through the store, carrying parcels so the ladies could shop without burden. Think of it as an early version of personal shopping, but with the slightly creepy veneer of Victorian propriety. Historians still argue whether these department stores were true precursors to malls or simply large-scale shops. Some point to the indoor, multi-floor layout, the curated displays, and the combination of leisure and commerce as key features linking them to the mall concept. Others insist the experience remained tightly controlled and hierarchical, catering to specific social classes rather than creating a universal communal space. As you wander deeper into Harrods, you notice how the architecture encourages movement. Grand staircases guide shoppers upward, wide aisles encourage lingering, and each floor has its own theme. The design is deliberate, almost psychological, subtly encouraging people to explore, browse, and buy. You realize this is no longer just commerce, it's theater, strategy, and art rolled into one. And here's a light joke. Imagine a Victorian influencer trying to haul her purchases. Here's my new parasol, a set of embroidered gloves, and a charmingly useless hat, 3 stars for functionality, 5 stars for aesthetics. Victorian Hall. London's department stores also introduced the concept of ancillary amenities, reading rooms, cafes, and sitting areas where shoppers could rest. The store itself became a destination, not just a transaction point. Shopping was evolving into an all-day experience, combining retail with leisure and socializing. Yet even with these innovations, the department store is still just one building. It's magnificent, yes, but the sprawling indoor malls of the future, where multiple stores coexist, anchored by giant retailers, with food courts, entertainment, and leisure spaces, still lie ahead. The stage is set, the tools are refined, but the final leap hasn't yet been taken. As night falls over London, gas lamps flicker across polished wood floors and brass fittings, shoppers depart into fog and drizzle, and the department store sits silently, waiting for the 20th century to push it toward the mall as we know it. You step out of the grand department store into the familiar rhythm of American small towns, where streets stretch straight and true, lined with wooden sidewalks and storefronts painted in cheerful colors. The air smells of fresh-cut wood, coal, and the occasional sweet note of molasses from a nearby candy shop. Here, commerce is beginning to take a distinctly different form than Europe, the American Main Street. It's practical, approachable, and designed for everyday life rather than spectacle. You wander down one of these streets. One side boasts a bakery, a general store, and a dry goods shop. The other side is lined with a drugstore, a barber, and a haberdashery. People stroll with baskets or children in tow, greeting shopkeepers by name. There's a sense of community, of routine, and of trust built over repeated encounters. Unlike the arcades and department stores of Europe, the American Main Street thrives on accessibility and familiarity. Here's a mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, American towns were increasingly organized around their main street, combining residential, civic, and commercial functions. These streets were the hubs of everyday life, providing not just goods but social interaction, political debate, and community identity. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some main streets installed curbside delivery services before the advent of automobiles. Customers would leave horse-drawn carts in front of stores, and clerks would toss packages onto them, an early form of click and collect that would make 21st century shoppers proud. Historians still argue whether these main streets were precursors to malls. On one hand, they consolidated commerce into centralized locations, fostering convenience and community. On the other, they remained outdoors, fragmented, and designed around streets rather than enclosed complexes. The mall's key innovation, bringing multiple retailers under a single roof, was still absent. As you stroll further, you notice the rhythm of the street. Shop signs swing lazily in the breeze, children chase each other around lampposts, and the baker waves at the grocer. Commerce here is intertwined with life itself. People linger, chat, and occasionally barter. Shopping is social as much as it is functional. You start to realize that this environment nurtures the same consumer instincts that will eventually feed the mall: convenience, pleasure, and the joy of choice. And here's your light joke. Imagine a small-town Main Street influencer taking a selfie in front of the hardware store. Nothing like a sunny day and a brand new hammer. Main Street vibes. Hammer Hall. The American Main Street also introduces the first hints of mobility-driven commerce. With the advent of railroads, goods can now arrive from neighboring towns and distant cities, expanding choice and variety. The seeds of a modern mall, dependent on extensive supply networks, are being planted here. Yet, as charming and functional as these streets are, they remain open-air, linear, and dependent on foot traffic. There's no climate-controlled refuge, no centralized parking lot, no single complex drawing shoppers from miles around. The mall as a physical structure has not yet appeared, even if the cultural appetite for it is growing steadily. By twilight, the sun casts long shadows across wooden facades. Street lamps flicker to life, illuminating painted signs and awning stripes. Children scamper home, and shopkeepers begin to close shutters, leaving the street quiet but expectant. Somewhere in the back of every small town mind, the dream of something bigger, more unified, more convenient, stirs quietly. The mall is inching closer, still waiting for the 20th century to give it wings. You leave the quiet charm of the American Main Street and enter the early 20th century, a world pulsing with electricity, automobiles, and the hum of industry. Streets are wider now, lined with shiny new buildings, neon signs flickering to life, and cars honking as they pass. Shopping is transforming faster than ever before, fueled by new technologies and a growing obsession with convenience and style. You feel the energy of possibility buzzing through the air. This is the moment where the mall begins to emerge from the shadows of history. You step into one of the early department stores in New York or Chicago. The interiors are larger, grander, and more organized than ever. Escalators carry shoppers between floors while electric lighting floods the polished floors, reflecting off brass railings and glass counters. Display windows glow with mannequins dressed in the latest fashions, enticing passers-by to step inside. The architecture is now fully intentional, designed not just to house shops, but to orchestrate the shopper's journey, guiding movement, attention, and desire. Here's a mainstream historical fact. By the 1920s, department stores like Marshall Field's in Chicago had grown into massive, multi-floor emporiums offering everything from clothing to home goods under one roof. They featured amenities like restaurants, lounges, and reading rooms, establishing the concept of shopping as a leisurely, all-day activity rather than just a practical necessity. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some stores employed window dressers who would spend hours creating elaborate displays, often enlisting live animals, caged birds, rabbits, even goats, to capture the public's imagination. Imagine peeking through the glass and seeing a goat wearing a miniature coat promoting winter fashion. Historians still argue whether these early department stores were the direct precursors to shopping malls. Some say yes, pointing to the combination of scale, variety, indoor space, and leisure-oriented design. Others argue that while they pioneered elements of the mall experience, the department store was still primarily urban, vertically structured, and oriented around single buildings rather than sprawling complexes. As you stroll through one of these emporiums, you notice the sensory orchestration. The scent of perfume wafts from one corner, the clink of silver from another, and soft music drifts from speakers above. Shoppers linger, sip coffee in small cafes tucked between counters, and chat, turning shopping into social performance. Retail has become both an art and a science. And here's a light joke. Imagine a 1920s socialite doing a shopping haul reel. Darling, I simply had to purchase this hat, 2 gloves, and a novelty teapot. Truly, life cannot be lived without these essentials. Shopping goals. You also sense the underlying business strategy emerging. Retailers understand that keeping customers inside longer increases purchases. Elevators, escalators, and strategically placed amenities are designed to maximize both comfort and spending. The mall is being built, not just physically, but psychologically, conditioning shoppers for the experience that will eventually dominate suburban landscapes. Yet despite all the grandeur, the department store remains urban, confined, and singular. The sprawling, multi-building malls with parking lots and climate-controlled environments are still decades away. But the blueprint is here, waiting to be expanded and reimagined in response to the automobile age. By evening, the streets outside glow with the reflection of electric lights, shop windows gleam, and streetcars trundle past. You step back outside, feeling the pulse of a society on the brink of a retail revolution. The mall is not fully realized yet, but its shadow stretches across the city, waiting for the moment when suburbia, cars, and consumer culture collide to give it life. You follow the hum of engines and streetcars out of the city and into the expanding suburbs of post-World War II America. The air smells of fresh asphalt, gasoline, and the faint sweetness of newly planted lawns. Families clutch shopping lists as they pile into sedans, leaving behind cramped city streets for the freedom of broad, flat avenues lined with strip malls and shopping centers. Here, commerce and mobility finally collide, creating conditions ripe for the first true malls. You pull into a parking lot adjacent to a single-story shopping complex. The space is vast, open, and designed with cars in mind, an entirely new consideration. Unlike the pedestrian-focused streets of Europe or the downtown department stores of New York, here everything revolves around accessibility and convenience. The architecture is simple but deliberate: large windows, wide walkways, and clearly marked entrances that beckon drivers to park, step inside, and begin the retail journey. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In 1956, Southdale Center in Edina, Minnesota, designed by Victor Gruen, opened as the first fully enclosed, climate-controlled shopping mall in the United States. It featured multiple anchor stores, indoor walkways, skylights, and communal areas, a blueprint that would define American malls for decades. And here's a quirky tidbit. Gruen originally intended the mall to include residential and cultural spaces, envisioning it as a communal hub akin to a European town square. In other words, he dreamed of a mall where you could live, shop, dine, and socialize, essentially suburban urbanism under one roof. Most malls would, of course, eventually ditch the residential component, leaving the consumer paradise intact but the civic dream unrealized. Historians still argue whether Southdale truly represents the first modern mall or if it was simply an evolution of earlier retail innovations. Some assert that the combination of enclosure, climate control, and integrated amenities marks a radical departure from both department stores and arcades. Others note that the social ideals behind Gruen's design, public gathering, culture, and mixed-use development, were largely abandoned in later malls, leaving a primarily commercial focus. You wander the indoor corridors. Natural light filters through the skylights, illuminating polished tile floors and the glint of storefront glass. Families stroll leisurely, stopping at bakeries, toy stores, or clothing outlets. Benches provide space for rest, while fountains add ambience. Shopping here is no longer merely about buying, it's about comfort, leisure, and the subtle orchestration of experience. You notice how circulation, signage, and store placement guide you almost imperceptibly from one section to another. Retail psychology is in full bloom. And here's a light joke. Imagine telling your 18th century ancestor about this. Yes, you can drive your horse-drawn carriage into a lot, walk through a giant glass building, and buy socks, frozen pizza, and a lawn-mower all under one roof. They'd probably faint. Southdale also marks the beginning of the mall as a social destination. Teenagers loiter, couples stroll, and occasional events draw crowds. The mall becomes a stage for life itself, a communal yet curated environment where commerce, culture, and leisure intermingle. Unlike earlier arcades, bazaars, or department stores, it integrates scale, comfort, and accessibility in a way never seen before. By the time the sun sets outside, the indoor lighting casts a warm glow on glossy floors and shop windows. You pause near a fountain, watching families drift past, and realize, after centuries of experimentation, from the Greek agora to Byzantine arcades, Renaissance passages, and department stores, the mall has finally arrived, fully realized. The dream of a centralized, climate-controlled, leisure-focused retail world has been achieved at last. You step out of Southdale Center into the sprawling post-war suburbs, where cookie-cutter houses stretch toward the horizon and cars hum along endless streets. The air smells faintly of freshly cut grass, asphalt, and gasoline, a sensory signature of modern life. Here, the mall is no longer an experimental curiosity. It is becoming the centerpiece of suburban culture, the nucleus around which social life, commerce, and leisure orbit. You wander into one of the newer malls of the 1960s or 70s, a step beyond Southdale. Multilevel walkways rise above open atriums, escalators carry shoppers from floor to floor, and glass elevators offer panoramic views of stores below. Anchor tenants dominate the ends of corridors, drawing people deeper into the maze of shops. Lighting is soft but bright enough to highlight polished floors, glossy displays, and mannequins meticulously dressed in the latest fashions. The air carries the scent of perfume, coffee, and new leather goods, blending into a signature mall perfume that you recognize instantly even decades later. Here's a mainstream historical fact. By the 1970s, enclosed shopping malls had become ubiquitous across suburban America. Developers, architects, and retailers had refined the formula: anchor stores, climate control, food courts, ample parking, and carefully curated environments, all designed to maximize dwell time and consumer spending. The mall had evolved into a cultural institution, a place to meet friends, linger on weekends, and even date. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some early suburban malls experimented with miniature indoor amusement rides. One mall in California installed a small carousel next to a department store, creating a strange hybrid of retail and theme park. Shoppers could buy socks while children spun in circles nearby, a surreal vision of commerce and leisure intertwined. Historians still argue whether malls fulfilled Victor Grune's original civic vision. Grune had dreamed of integrated spaces that included housing, parks, and cultural facilities alongside shops, aiming to recreate a European town square in the suburbs. Most developers, prioritizing profit over community, stripped out those social ideals. In their place arose a vast consumer playground, an entirely commercial, climate-controlled utopia. You stroll through the corridors, noticing the choreography of space. Seating areas beckon you to rest, signage draws you toward specialty shops, and strategically placed fountains, sculptures, and skylights encourage lingering. Children dart between stores while teenagers loiter near the food court, subtly echoing centuries of human behavior in bazaars, arcades, and department stores. Retailers have learned that the longer you stay, the more you spend, and the mall's design reflects that principle in every tile, light fixture, and escalator. And here's a light joke. Imagine a time traveler from 1850 entering a 1970s mall. They'd probably circle the escalator 5 times, muttering, "Are these moving stairs a kind of magic?" Meanwhile, someone in bell-bottoms explains that yes, it's magic, and you can shop while riding it. As evening approaches, shoppers begin to drift home, but the mall retains a quiet glow. The skylights reflect the fading light, fountains sparkle, and the hum of conversation and footsteps creates a gentle soundtrack. You pause, taking in the scene, and realize that this is the culmination of centuries of trial, error, and innovation. From Greek agoras to Roman markets, Byzantine arcades, Renaissance passages, Enlightenment galleries, department stores, and suburban streets, the mall is the tangible heir to thousands of years of human experimentation in commerce and communal space. The mall has become more than a building, it's a cultural microcosm, a place where architecture, psychology, and social behavior intersect. Every element, from layout to lighting to anchor stores, is designed to guide, delight, and sometimes manipulate, yet the experience retains a universal charm, comfort, choice, and spectacle intertwined. The dream of a centralized, accessible, and immersive shopping world has finally been realized, decades after the earliest experiments in human commerce. You take a slow walk to the nearest exit, passing families, friends, and couples lingering under skylights. Somewhere in the background, a fountain trickles, children's laughter rings softly, and the faint smell of coffee lingers. You can almost hear the whispers of history, tracing the journey from open-air markets to the enclosed suburban paradise surrounding you. The mall is no longer a concept, it is life itself, a space designed for commerce, socialization, and endless human interaction. You slow your pace, leaving behind the bright lights and hum of the mall, feeling the soft echo of footsteps in empty corridors. The smells of coffee, polished floors, and perfumed mannequins fade gradually as your mind drifts through the centuries you've just traversed. You picture Greek agoras where traders called across sunlit squares, Roman forums bustling with fishmongers and leatherworkers, and Byzantine arcades glowing with lantern light. You imagine the chaotic beauty of medieval fairs, the elegance of Renaissance passages, and the refined window shopping of Enlightenment galleries. Each step has brought you closer to this modern, climate-controlled temple of commerce. Your senses begin to soften. The sounds of shoppers chatting, carts rolling, and escalators humming grow distant, replaced by a gentle mental echo of footsteps across marble, wood, and tile. You feel the slow unfolding of time, the deliberate layering of human ingenuity, architecture, and culture, each generation building upon the last. Even the quirks, goats in Venetian displays, pigs on trial at medieval fairs, carousel rides in suburban malls linger in your imagination, reminding you of the delightful unpredictability of human ambition. It's calming to reflect that the mall, for all its complexity and scale, is ultimately a human creation shaped by desire, necessity, and ingenuity. From open markets to sprawling suburban complexes, it is a testament to centuries of experimentation, adaptation, and imagination. You feel a gentle reassurance that the spaces we inhabit, shop in, and wander through are living legacies, carrying whispers of history through every corridor, skylight, and tiled floor. As your breathing slows, you picture the final scene, the warm glow of skylights, the soft trickle of fountains, and the murmur of conversation fading into the background. Time stretches and settles, wrapping around you like a soft blanket. You feel the long arc of history, from agora to mall, ease into quiet reflection.